Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown, where each time we meet, we run down the IT news of the week with a variable degree of snarkiness. I'm your host, Stephen Foskin, and joining me today, filling in for Tom Hollingsworth, who's in California at Mobility Field Day 9, is an esteemed co-host, Mr. Ned Bellavance. Welcome to the show.
Why, thank you, Stephen. I'm very excited to be here and to talk about some interesting tech stuff. But first, what day is it?
It is actually, amazingly enough, National Pack Rat Day. And if you're aware of my personal blog, you know that it's called Pack Rat. So today is, in fact, Stephen Foskett Day.
That should be nationally recognized, I think. Another one that's nationally recognized is Cherry Cobbler Day, which, I mean, let's be honest. If you're going to eat a cobbler, is there any other choice besides cherry? And the answer is no. So whatever you said, the answer is no. But let's break things down. In terms of tech news, I heard a little rumor that data orchestrator Hammerspace has acquired a French startup called RozoFS for erasure coding. What do you know about this, Stephen?
Well, it's interesting. Hammerspace is a company that you're very familiar with. They've come to Tech Field Day many times in the past, and we've dived deep into their technology over the years. We have not actually talked to RozoFS in the past, but one of the things about Hammerspace is that essentially the company is designed to make data appear everywhere or anywhere it's needed. Their whole concept is data orchestration, which is something I will, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about here in some other Gestalt IT content, but we'll include links to that in the show notes. Overall, one of the things about Hammerspace, though, is that it needs to be able to intelligently distribute data, intelligently protect data, intelligently move data. And of course, the modern way to do that is through erasure coding. So this French startup had been working on a new erasure coding technology called a Mojet transform. I don't know what that is, but it sounds very cool. And it's now part of Hammerspace. So the company apparently made this move, this acquisition, late last year, but didn't talk about it. In fact, they didn't even talk about it to me until it was announced. So I can't wait to see what they do with this technology. I have to say, too, that Hammerspace is really surprising us all with their growth and their market success. This is a company that, basically is a scrappy bunch of industry veterans. And it's attracted a great group of people that I've known for years and years. And they're really building something cool over there. So if you're not aware of Hammerspace, give them a shot. And I can't wait to see the next version with this RozoFS technology built into it. Ned, Google showed off some new devices like the pricey Pixel Fold and Pixel Tablet. It also took a moment to reestablish itself as a leader in AI. They showed improvements to Bard, Duet AI coming to workspaces to do things like help compose emails in Gmail or create slides in, what's that product? Slides. They also are pushing integrations in Google Search to give you possibly incorrect use information in your search results. And you can test that out in labs if you're curious. They have their own answer to GPT-4 that's integrated with Bard, and improvements allow portions to run on local devices instead of hitting the cloud. What's your take, Ned, on Google I/O 2023?
Well, the interesting thing about this year's Google I/O is that was a single day. They really crammed a lot of information into that keynote and that single day. And it's a 3-hour keynote. So if you want to go watch it, and you have 3 hours to burn, that's fine. But there are also a bunch of really good summary YouTube videos out there that kind of snip it into the main points. Maybe they could have used their own AI to summarize the keynote. So speaking of AI, they did introduce a new version of their modeling, which is called PaLM 2, the successor to PaLM 1, which was just called PaLM. And this is really their answer to GPT-4 in terms of scope and scale and capabilities. And now they're working on integrating this new model with all of their products in any way that they can. For instance, they're now calling a new product called Duet AI, which gives you the idea that when you're working in these various office applications, their workspace suite, the AI is there to help you, to work with you, to compose things like you're singing a duet. So they showed examples of, I want to compose an email, and I'm going to give you the bare bones. Write me an email that has this content in it and this tone of voice, and then it will try to generate that email for you. And then you can use follow-up prompts to have it refine the content of that email until it's close enough that you just want to make a few quick edits. That was pretty cool. The other thing they talked about, as you mentioned, was being able to develop slides in slides. And that's something that I am particularly interested in because I don't enjoy creating slide decks. I usually have a picture and an idea in my head, but I don't want to do all the clicking around to make it happen. So, hey, I'd love it if an AI could take over for me. The devices they introduced, there were a few of them. The big splashy one was probably the Pixel Fold, which is literally that. It's a foldable phone, akin to what Samsung already has out on the market. And interestingly, it has a front screen and then an internal screen that folds out to the full size, but it's not that much thicker than the current Pixel phones. So if foldables are of interest to you, you might want to check that out. They also introduced the Pixel tablet, their first entry into the tablet market in quite some time. And this one is basically like Google Home or the Nest Max or whatever, but the screen's detachable. So it comes with a speaker base that you can magnetically attach it to, but then you can just pull it off and walk around and do tablet-y things with it. So if that's of interest to you, I believe that one's available right now. The Fold is available for pre-order. Turning our gaze back to storage and storage type things, Stephen, there's a story about Vast Data achieving certification for its data platform as a certified data store for NVIDIA DGX SuperPOD, which provides organizations with scalable and agile performance for modern AI workloads. I wasn't familiar with this certification, so can you expand a little more on what Vast is doing with NVIDIA?
Yeah, this is actually a very exciting story. First off, let's just say that Vast has been incredibly impressive company. We've seen them at Field Day many times. I want to call your attention especially to Storage Field Day 23, where Vast presented, and they also brought in NVIDIA to present and talk about integration between the two companies. So, I wonder if that's related to this. So Vast Data makes this data platform, which is basically an incredibly scalable NAS platform for enterprise that uses Flash, including QLC Flash, but offers scalability, reliability, high availability, everything. It's a pretty great high-end storage platform. But NVIDIA's DGX SuperPOD has never supported an enterprise NAS platform that I'm aware of previous to this. If you don't know, the DGX SuperPOD is basically a way to deploy your own AI supercomputer using NVIDIA's latest technology. But a DGX SuperPOD needs to have additional components, especially storage, to go along with it. So all of the companies in the storage industry have been jockeying to be a good partner for NVIDIA for these superpods because everybody wants to be able to power, the latest AI supercomputers. And that's what Vast is offering now. So essentially the Vast data platform is certified as a data store for DGX, meaning that enterprises or hyperscalers, cloud, whoever wanted to have their own NVIDIA superpod can just basically go and deploy this thing in a kind of a cookie cutter, recipe kind of fashion. It supports, of course, all the latest machine learning, deep learning workloads. And of course, it includes all of the Vast capabilities, including scalability and performance, like I mentioned earlier. Another aspect of this, of Vast, is that it provides multi-tenancy, which might be interesting for some cloud providers, along with encryption and authentication and all that sort of thing. And one of the big things that the Vast platform offers is quality of service controls. In other words, you can basically say this workload needs this level of service, and it's important that you meet those, throughput, latency requirements, that sort of thing. Anyway, it's a really impressive product on its own, and combining that with the NVIDIA DGX platform, I think, is really a great move for Vast. honestly, this is just the next step in, I think, the world's acceptance of VAST as the next great storage company. Ned, Microsoft uses tens of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs in its data center and probably pays a pretty penny for that privilege. Bloomberg is reporting that they're dedicating engineering resources to assist AMD in the development of their GPUs to serve as a counterweight, maybe, to NVIDIA's dominance. Microsoft has a similar success with an AMD version of Azure VMs at a slightly discounted price. What do you expect to see here?
My expectation is that, well, like you said, Microsoft is using tens of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs today, probably for things like we discussed in the previous article. And because of that, they're shelling out a lot of money. When you think about how Microsoft is currently structured today, the vast majority of their spending is capital expenditures on Azure data centers. And they're looking at those list items and going, whoa, that NVIDIA list item is getting a little out of hand. Maybe we need to prop up probably their biggest competitor, which is AMD. Maybe we need to prop them up a little bit, give them a helping hand to get their GPU house in order so that we can buy GPUs from them, or at least use that as a bargaining chip when we go to the table with NVIDIA. So I think that's certainly what we can expect to see in the next 2 to 3 years, is the introduction of more AMD GPU-based offerings within Microsoft Azure. They're also turning an eye to being able to run AI workloads on premises. And when you're looking at on premises and costs, and especially companies that might not want to use NVIDIA, they might want to use an alternative hardware platform, Microsoft is interested in offering that and tuning their software to be able to work either on NVIDIA or on ARM's GPUs, or I'm sorry, AMD's GPUs. They saw similar success, as you mentioned, when they started offering AMD-based CPUs for their virtualization platform within Azure, charging only a few fractions of a cent less. But if you're an enterprise who's running thousands of VMs in Azure and you have the option to go with AMD, there's probably not much of a downside that you're seeing, and you're saving some money on the total cost. So I think this really just is Microsoft using their vaults of money, basically, to provide some competition to NVIDIA by helping out a competitor. I feel a little bad for AMD because they always seem to be a bridesmaid, but never the bride with this sort of thing. But I guess for now, at least, that's their lot in life. The next story you have in the docket is from Solidigm. They've introduced a new D5P5430. It's a QLC SSD optimized for mainstream and read-intensive workloads, and it appears to offer high storage density and equivalent read performance to TLC SSDs. And I'm assuming that doesn't stand for tender, loving care. So can you take us through what they've introduced and what it's capable of?
Yeah, this is it may sound like kind of a mishmash of letters and numbers. That's to the uninitiated outside the storage industry. A lot of our stuff sounds like that. And I'm going to use some letters and numbers in here, but bear with me. So the D5P5430, as you mentioned, is Solidigm's latest SSD. And you're familiar with SSDs. Everybody's familiar with them. Why is this thing important? Well, number one, it's all about the QLC. So Solidigm is a leader in what's called QLC, which is basically instead of storing 1 bit per cell in NAND flash, they can store 4. And this allows much greater density, lower power consumption, et cetera. And that's what this SSD uses. Now, QLC has been tarred with a reputation as being slow or unreliable in the past, but that's really not the case any longer. In fact, this is Solidigm's 4th generation QLC SSD, and they've shown that the technology really, really works well. So what's special about the P5430? Well, it's about the form factor. These things come in the kind of forms that you might expect. You may be familiar with U.2, which kind of looks like a regular little hard drive. They also have E1.S, which is basically a compact. It's the successor to what was called the ruler, essentially. And this new form factor, E3.S, which is basically the next generation form factor. All of these allow Solidigm to pack a lot of these SSDs into a chassis. We actually just released a video where we talked with Supermicro about how they're using the P5430 in their solutions to basically deliver amazing levels of storage capacity in not a lot of use. So essentially, these new form factors give you better cooling, better power, better density, and all of that combined with the benefits of QLC and the fact that these SSDs work really well and last and perform. Plus the capacity, they're talking about 15, maybe even 30 terabytes in the future, really means that this is kind of a revolutionary product, even if it is a bit of a mishmash of letters and numbers. Ned, let's take a closer look at one of the big stories that we're hearing about. We've all been hearing about AI constantly. Everyone probably, even your mother's probably heard about ChatGPT and how AI is coming for your job. And that's really one of those cases where there's a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of reality there. Controversy around this has been hitting enterprise tech as well. Obviously, ChatGPT is finding its way into various corners of the world. We've heard about Bard and Google and all these projects that would bring AI into the world. But the impact of large language models is finally coming to the court. And we've seen litigation against GitHub and Microsoft and OpenAI. And of course, this week as well, the US Congress heard testimony from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. What do we think about all this? IT pros are really trying to figure their way around this AI revolution and trying to understand what's going on. I guess let's start with the Copilot case.
Sure. I've been using the Copilot product basically since it launched. And I use it to write code. And actually, I use it to write scripts sometimes because I write stuff in Markdown and VS Code. And it's kind of helpful in that regard. Now, there is currently a lawsuit from unknown parties. It's a class action lawsuit with John Doe people as part of the class action, so they're staying anonymous for the moment. But the lawsuit is against GitHub, Microsoft, and OpenAI, basically claiming that what's produced by the codex that's behind Copilot is violating some laws. Most notably, the judge threw out some of their allegations, but he kept two in there. And one of them is the fact that it's violating the software licenses that are associated with some of the repositories it's scraping the code for its model from. So if you have there's a ton of different open source policies, open source licenses out there that have different restrictions and requirements for you to attribute where you got the information from, or if you transform it, some limitations on the way that you can transform it. When Copilot is writing code for you or suggesting code for you, the code that it produces doesn't give you any idea of where it got it from, nor any attribution on perhaps it's actually copying it wholesale from an existing repository that's out there. So the one allegation that's standing is that it's violating those software licenses. And then the other allegation that is being left to stand is that it's violating the portions of the DMCA that require attribution for derivative works, which leaves up for debate. And this is probably one of the biggest areas of debate is how do we think about the content that's created by an AI? Is that a net new creative work? Is it a derivative work that requires attribution? Or is it some third category that we haven't thought about before? If I, as a human, look at a bunch of code that's on GitHub, and then I sit down and write stuff in my code editor, I'm probably inspired by the code that I read. I may even reproduce some of it verbatim by accident, but that doesn't make it a derivative work in the sense that I have to attribute all of the different repositories I've ever read in my life. It just means that I'm writing code based off of previous experience. So it's really interesting to think about that and how we're going to categorize what's created by something like Copilot. So this was just the beginning arguments. It's now going to go into the next phase of things. And this is probably going to take a long time to work its way through this district court. And then who knows, it may end up going in front of the Supreme Court in a few years. But nothing in law happens very quickly, and nothing in Congress happens very quickly either, as we saw with the testimony from Sam Altman.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that for a minute because, of course, even though in IT we tend to try to keep ourselves separate from politics, this is not really politics so much as policy. And I think that what's going to be developed in Congress is going to affect us all. So, as many of you know, there have been mistakes, let's say, from Congress critters previously in trying to regulate tech. Think encryption keys and backdoors, social media regulation, the controversy over Section 230 about basically freedom of speech online. All of these things have been, I think it's safe to say, bungled by the US politicians and, frankly, politicians around the world. And of course, AI is the next topic to get bungled. Happily, Congress invited Sam Altman in to testify. They're also seeking a lot more expert input from others as well, thank goodness, because you don't want to just rely on what the OpenAI guy says. But the idea here, I think, is that Congress has finally learned that it actually needs to learn something about the technology before they enact laws to control it. That being said, I think a lot of us were surprised at the chummy and friendly tone of this testimony, given all of the news stories that we're seeing about ChatGPT and hallucinations and failures and all these kind of things. The testimony was remarkably calm and kind, with Richard Blumenthal, the chairperson of the committee, talking about concern about welfare of society, but also praising Altman along with others like Josh Hawley and Cory Booker. All of these folks were talking essentially about what AI means and what sort of oversight Congress needs. Happily as well, Altman and IBM, who also testified, said that they agreed that there should be regulations, and they would cooperate with whatever regulation Congress came up with, and that the goal of all of this work is to basically help people and make new services, which is all wonderful. But of course, these are all for-profit companies. And all of them are really desperately fighting right now to sort of seize the moment and be able to use AI to do all sorts of things, like what you just talked about, Ned, which can cause some problems. We're seeing widespread use of large language models all around the media world. We're seeing all sorts of facepalm-worthy failures. What do you think of the idea of government regulation?
It's a nice idea in theory, but there's obviously some issues with it. One is just at the moment, they don't fundamentally understand the technology. The other problem is that technology has a tendency to move fast and much faster than the regulations can keep up with. And the other thing that I would caution around regulation is if we're having these large companies that have a vested interest in staying profitable, helping to write the regulations, those regulations are going to tend to favor the large companies that can adhere to whatever's in the regulations and can, in effect, kill off the smaller companies that don't have the army of lawyers and compliance officers that would be necessary to adhere to whatever's in the regulations. So I favor a light touch when it comes to regulation and bringing in people to write the regulations that have an understanding of what's behind the technology and some of the use cases and ways that people are actually using it versus the theoretical use cases that'll be trotted out when you have someone like Sam in front of the congressional committee.
Yeah, I heartily endorse what you're saying. The idea is that you want to be realistic about it. Number one, you can't just say no AI because people are going to use it. You can't say yes AI because obviously it's not suited for everything. In fact, we're hearing every day all sorts of new, terrible, useless applications for AI that it really shouldn't be used for. I want to call your attention to one organization that I think is actually doing a really nice job. And surprisingly enough, it's Wikipedia. I don't mean go to Wikipedia and look this up. I mean, look at their policy. So their policy is pretty cool. They essentially recognize the fact that people are going to be using large language models to generate content, and that content needs to be treated appropriately. So they reflect realistically on the fact that you cannot just blindly publish LLM content on Wikipedia and hope for the best. Every editor has to take responsibility for it. They have to fact check it. They have to copy edit it. What they say as well, and this actually I heartily agree, LLMs are really good at proofreading and formatting and summarizing and paraphrasing. And frankly, all of those things are things that are needed when you're writing an online encyclopedia or basically a journalist. So for that, sure, absolutely use it. But the most important thing, I think, is to make sure that you're using it, but that you're also checking it and that it doesn't just get everywhere. Like I said, I don't think we can stuff this genie in the bottle. And I hope that Congress isn't going to try to do that.
It would be useless to try to do so. The genie is well and out of the bottle, and you can't just ban AI because that's a non-starter, but you can't just accept it at face value either. And I think, in addition to Wikipedia, enterprises need to wisen up and also adopt similar policies, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of, let's call it shadow AI instead of shadow IT happening at your enterprise. Yeah, you said no one's allowed to use AI and LLM to generate emails, but you know they're going to. So why not put some guardrails around the usage as opposed to just trying to ban it outright?
Yeah, absolutely. And and I'm not opposed to AI. In fact, utilizing tech, the first 3 seasons of our podcast was focused on AI. We know a lot about it. We've seen a lot of what it can do, and frankly, it can do some amazing things. Check out, for example, what we saw at Aruba Atmosphere recently in terms of network management. A lot of the ways that AI is being used in security, in IT, as well as, of course, as you mentioned, assisting and helping people to get things done. We can't not use this stuff because, frankly, it's there and it helps us. But also, we as technologists have to be very realistic about what it can and what it can't do. Thank you so much, Ned, for joining us for this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Before we go, let's take a look at what's going on. As I mentioned, Tom is at Mobility Field Day 9, so I urge you to check that out. We've got Arista, Solona, Cisco, Fortinet, Juniper, NetAlly, and Ruckus presenting today through Friday. And of course, if you miss any of that, you can find it on LinkedIn. You can find us on YouTube as well. Just use your favorite search engine for Mobility Field Day 9. Also, we have Cloud Field Day coming up in a few weeks. We'll have companies like Morpheus Data, RackN, Zerto, Jetstream, and somebody named Ned Bellavance, I think, is going to be there. We're going to be at Cisco Live US. We'll hear from Cisco, Backbox, OpenGear, and others. Check out techfieldday.com to learn more about that. Ned, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where we can find more from you?
Sure. My name is Ned Bellavance. The easiest way to find me is to go to my website, nedinthecloud.com, or find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me now. I've been using less and less Twitter, to be honest.
Yeah, me too, actually. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. That's seems to be the big site that I'm using a lot now, as well as on Mastodon. You'll find me there too. Well, thanks so much for watching the Gestalt IT Rundown. You can catch new episodes of the Rundown every Wednesday as a YouTube video, or you can find us in your favorite podcast application as an audio podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday to talk about the IT news of the week that was. Until then, for myself, for Ned Bellavance, for the gallivanting Tom Hollingsworth, and all of us here in the Gestalt IT family, thanks for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.